I spent my whole life waiting for the right moment to start living. Saying it out loud feels strange, almost embarrassing, like admitting I built a house out of air and only noticed the walls weren't real once they started crumbling under my hand. But that's the truth of it. I kept telling myself I'd begin later, after the exams, after the degree, after the first real job, after the wedding, after the mortgage stopped strangling us, after the kids were older, after the kids moved out, after work got easier, after I lost the weight, after the holidays, after the noise settled. There was always something just ahead, a slightly better version of the present, a softer tomorrow I was sure would finally be the place where my life would actually start. And I carried that thought quietly, like a secret I didn't want to examine too closely, because it made the days easier to swallow. It let me move through the years without facing the feeling that I wasn't really in them. I don't think I even realized how long I'd been postponing myself. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was just the way I lived. I'd wake up, make the coffee, go to work, do what needed doing, and always somewhere in the back of my mind, there was this little whisper, not today, but soon. That promise was comforting. It felt responsible, mature even, as if delaying joy, delaying presence, delaying myself somehow meant I was building something bigger, something worth the wait. I told myself this for so long, it became my default way of breathing. I didn't talk about it to anyone, not because it was shameful, but because I didn't even see it as something to confess. I thought everyone lived this way, suspended between obligation and anticipation, quietly convinced that the real thing, the true life, would begin just after the next milestone. And I was good at performing the script. On paper, everything looked normal, respectable, predictable in that reassuring way people admire. I showed up, I handled things, I made the right decisions, I never caused trouble, I didn't fall apart, I didn't chase anything reckless, I didn't even let myself want too loudly. I thought that made me disciplined, balanced, smart, but underneath all that practicality there was this detachment, a kind of waiting room feeling, like I was sitting with a numbered ticket in my hand, convinced my turn was coming soon if I just stayed patient enough. And I stayed patient for decades. I didn't question it, because questioning would have required admitting that nothing was actually on its way, that there was no moment arriving, no switch about to flip, no version of myself waiting around the corner. So I kept quiet. I let the years stack up neatly like folded shirts in a drawer, and every time I thought about doing something for myself, something spontaneous, something alive, I'd tell myself the same line I'd repeated since I was young. I'll start when things calm down, when I have more time, more money, more certainty, more clarity, more something. Now sitting here, I hear how empty those words were. But back then they felt like a promise I believed in more than I ever believed in myself. I never said it out loud until now. I don't know why. Maybe because speaking it makes it real, and real things can't be postponed. Maybe because I didn't want to hear how flimsy my reasoning sounded. Or maybe, and this feels closest to the truth, I didn't want to admit I was scared. Not scared of failing, scared of living before I felt fully prepared for it, as if life required permission. As if I needed to earn the right moment before stepping into it. I know people love to talk about missed opportunities as if they arrive wrapped in bright paper, as if you can spot them from across the room. But mine never looked like that. Mine looked like ordinary days I walked through half awake. Simple choices I delayed, invitations I ignored, small chances to be present that I let dissolve because I thought I'd have better ones later. I lived like that for so long that later became a kind of religion for me. And now I'm finally saying it plainly without dressing it up. I spent my whole life waiting for the right moment, and the moment never came, only the waiting did. People always assume a feeling like mine comes from some dramatic wound, some heavy childhood or explosive failure. But the truth is, my life was painfully ordinary. So ordinary, it almost feels like a strange kind of disguise when I think back on it. There was no trauma waiting in the corners, no screaming matches, no violence, nothing that could serve as an excuse or a neat explanation. I grew up in a small apartment with parents who worked, ate dinner at the table, asked about school, argued quietly over bills like everyone else. I went to a decent university, not the best, not the worst. I got a job that wasn't exciting but paid enough. I married someone who matched me in temperament, steady, polite, never too loud, never too intense. We bought a house in a neighborhood where all the lawns looked the same. We had kids who grew up healthy, did their homework, got sick on schedule, brought home drawings and participation certificates. We went to birthday parties, school meetings, weekend markets. I fixed things around the house, changed the oil in the car, stood in line at the post office on Saturdays. We paid the mortgage, we took short vacations that were more like logistical exercises than escapes. We hosted relatives twice a year and complained afterward the way everyone does. From the outside, it all made sense. From the inside, it mostly felt like a sequence of tasks, small and endless, like someone else had written the script, and I was reading my lines without thinking too hard about what they meant. But even then, even in those early years when everything was technically fine, I sensed a distance forming between me and my own life, a kind of faint echo where there should have been presence. I didn't talk about it, mostly because it didn't feel like a real problem. How do you explain to someone that you're not quite there when there's no reason not to be? I did what everyone did. I worked. I saved. I planned. I told myself the same story everyone tells themselves. This stage is temporary. The real living comes later, when the debt is smaller, when the kids are older, when the house isn't such a mess, when I finally get a raise, when I'm less tired, when life becomes easier somehow, without me having to actually change anything. People around me seemed content enough, or at least they played content well. We all nodded through the same conversations. Busy week, long commute, need more sleep, maybe next year we'll take a proper vacation. All of it felt normal. So normal that it swallowed any thought of something deeper. I didn't feel unhappy, but I didn't feel anything that resembled being alive either. It was like my days floated just above the surface of my own skin. I could see my life, touch it, move through it, but I couldn't sink into it. I'd stand at the sink washing dishes while the kids laughed in the living room, and instead of joining them, I'd just keep wiping the same plate, not because I preferred chores, but because something in me always said, later. Later I'll play, later I'll relax, later I'll be the kind of father who gets down on the floor and builds castles out of blocks. Later I'll feel all the things I'm supposed to feel. Later I'll start actually living, and that later gave me permission to stay on autopilot, to pass through milestones like checking off items on a shopping list, engagement, wedding, first child, second child, new car, new furniture, promotions, gray hairs, holidays, graduations. All of it happened, and I was there technically, physically, but never fully rooted in any of it. Sometimes I'd catch myself in the mirror while shaving and feel this odd sensation, like I was watching a man rehearsing a version of adulthood instead of inhabiting it. Not broken, not suffering, just misplaced, aimless in a life that had structure but no pulse. And because nothing was wrong, I kept telling myself everything was fine, fine enough to wait, fine enough to postpone the urge to feel more, to be more, to step into my own skin instead of hovering slightly outside it. I thought normalcy meant safety, and safety meant time, endless time, time to finally breathe and enjoy and start living once everything else settled. But things never settled. They just shifted, slowly, from one phase to another, and I shifted with them, quietly, obediently, always carrying that dull sense that the real moment, the one where life feels like something you're inside of rather than looking at, hadn't arrived yet. I assumed it would. That assumption was the only thing that made the emptiness tolerable. And for decades, I didn't question it, because questioning felt unnecessary. After all, nothing was wrong. Nothing hurt, nothing broke, nothing screamed. It was just life. Ordinary, uneventful, normal life. And somehow, inside all that normalcy, the years dissolved before I even noticed they were passing. I played my role the way people admire in hindsight. The way they say he was reliable, he was steady, you could count on him. And for a long time I believed that meant I was doing everything right, even though something in me stayed dim, like a light bulb that glows but never fully turns on. I showed up for everything. I drove the kids to practices. I leaned over school projects with a ruler in my hand. I stood outside classrooms during parent-teacher nights, nodding at teachers who told me my children were polite and hardworking. I remembered every birthday, wrote cards, wrapped gifts, fixed loose cabinet doors before anyone noticed they were loose. I held the house up in all the practical ways. The groceries, the bills, the scheduling, the picking up and dropping off, and people praised me for it. They said I was dependable, responsible, the kind of man who didn't flinch when life demanded effort. And I won't pretend that wasn't true. I was good at effort. I was good at structure. I was good at doing things that could be measured. But the strange part, the part that only becomes clear when you're old enough to see the pattern from above, is that none of it connected me to anything. I played the part without ever entering the feeling behind it. I'd sit in the living room while my daughter practiced piano, and instead of hearing her, I'd be thinking about the week ahead. I'd tuck my son into bed and already be mentally in tomorrow's morning traffic. Even moments that were supposed to be tender, the first day of school, the first lost tooth, the nights they crawled into our bed after nightmares, all of it felt muted to me, like I was watching myself respond from a slight distance. I wasn't cold, I wasn't unkind, I did the right things. I just didn't feel the thing that was supposed to tie those moments together, and I learned, over time, to cover the absence with routines. I'd put my hand on my daughter's shoulder when she showed me a drawing, but I rarely asked her what she liked about it. I'd laugh at my son's jokes, but I rarely noticed the way his face lit up when he understood something for the first time. These were the kinds of moments my wife caught naturally, instinctively, bending toward them, with this warmth I admired but never knew how to imitate. Sometimes she'd glance at me during family gatherings, that soft questioning look she thought I didn't notice. Not accusing, just curious, as if she could feel the part of me that wasn't fully there. But she never said anything, and I took her silence as permission to keep going through life half present. The years made it easier to maintain the performance. You get used to your own detachment. You learn the timing of smiles, the weight of appropriate responses. You become skilled at nodding at the right moments, reacting in ways people read as caring, and they believe it, because you're doing all the visible parts. But beneath those actions, there was always this low, steady hum of distance. I knew something was missing, but I kept telling myself it didn't matter as long as I never failed anyone. That was my private rule. Don't fail, and you won't have to feel. And so my days filled with tasks instead of presence. I'd fix the broken fence, but forget to notice the way my wife's voice softened when she talked about her day. I'd balance the finances but miss the quiet sadness in my daughter's eyes when she outgrew a friendship. I'd help with homework, but forget to look up long enough to see how fast the kids were changing, how quickly they were becoming people I barely recognized. There was one small moment I still think about more than I want to admit. My son sitting at the edge of the couch holding a toy he had accidentally broken. He wasn't crying, just waiting for me to meet him where he was. I took the toy, fixed it, handed it back without looking at him fully. He said thanks in this small, relieved voice, and I remember nodding, already thinking about something else. It wasn't cruelty, it wasn't irritation, it was absence disguised as competence. Moments like that are countless in my memory, not clear scenes, but faint outlines of a life I moved through mechanically. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. I thought doing meant being. I thought fulfilling the role meant inhabiting it. But inside, there was always that thin layer of glass between me and the people I loved, a barrier no one else could see, one I didn't know how to break, because acknowledging it felt like admitting I was defective in some small, irreversible way. So I just kept going, kept performing, kept choosing the familiar motions over the vulnerable ones, telling myself I'd figure it out later when life calmed down, when I had more space, when I finally stepped into the version of myself I kept promising would arrive someday. And while I waited for that better self, the real moments slipped past me in quiet ways, unnoticed, unclaimed. I didn't fail anyone, but I also didn't join them. And that, more than anything else, is what I carry now. The knowledge that a person can live an entire life doing everything right and still never show up where it matters. It happened quietly, in a way that would sound insignificant to anyone else. The kind of moment that disappears from memory unless something inside you is already cracked and waiting for the right silence to widen the split. It was a Tuesday, I think, though it could have been any day. The days had all started blending into each other by then, soft and interchangeable. I woke up earlier than usual, not because of anything urgent, just an odd restlessness I couldn't name, and I walked into the kitchen like I had 10,000 mornings before. The house was still, the kind of stillness that used to feel peaceful when my wife was alive and the kids were small, but now it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I made coffee out of habit, stared at the steam, and sat down at the table without really meaning to. There was nothing special about the moment, no argument the night before, no medical scare, no sudden tragedy, just a chair, a cup cooling between my hands, and the soft hum of the refrigerator. And yet sitting there, something in me finally stopped pretending. I felt this wave of recognition, not dramatic, not painful, just total, like I was seeing my own life from the outside for the first time. I looked at the fridge, at the clutter of old photos held by magnets. Most of them had been there for years. My daughter holding her diploma, my son at a beach we only visited once, my wife laughing at something I can't remember. All those versions of us, frozen in time, and I realized I couldn't recall the actual days those pictures came from. I knew the dates, I knew the events, but the feeling of them, the texture of being there, was gone. It had never fully registered in the first place. I stood up, took one of the photos down. My daughter at maybe 8 or 9, missing a front tooth, smiling wider than she ever did as an adult. And I waited for something to stir in me. It didn't. Not warmth, not nostalgia, just this heavy understanding that I'd been absent in the very moments that were supposed to anchor a life. I put the photo back and felt my hands shake a little, not from emotion but from the realization that I had nothing to fall back on except the story I'd been telling myself for decades, that I'd start living properly once life stopped demanding so much of me. And somehow, in that kitchen, it became unbearable to keep believing that lie. I walked into the living room and sat in my wife's old chair. the one spot in the house that still held the shape of her presence. And for the first time in my life, I let myself sit without reaching for anything else. No phone, no newspaper, no chores that made me feel useful. I just sat, and into that stillness crept the truth. There was no right moment coming. There never had been. I had postponed everything that mattered. Not because I was too busy, but because I was too scared to actually enter my own life while it was happening. I kept thinking I needed more time, more assurance, more readiness, but the readiness never came. It was supposed to arrive after the next milestone, or the one after that, but each milestone only pushed the horizon further away. I looked at the empty corner of the room where we used to put the Christmas tree and realized I couldn't recall a single year when I truly felt the season. I remembered the tasks, the shopping, the lights I put up, but not the actual warmth. I remembered the logistics, not the living. And slowly, like a truth unfolding in layers, I understood that I had been waiting for the perfect moment in the same way people wait for a train that was never scheduled to arrive. I'd built a whole life around that wait. I felt the weight of it settle on my chest, not dramatic, just heavy, and I knew, with a clarity that made the room feel smaller, that all the time I thought I had was already behind me. I wasn't young anymore. I wasn't even middle-aged. I had reached the part of life where the days feel both faster and emptier, where the evenings stretch but the years collapse. And in that realization was the quiet, devastating truth. There was no later left. Everything I thought I'd eventually allow myself to feel or do or become had expired without me noticing. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat there, finally face to face with the life I'd sleepwalked through. And the silence around me felt like a verdict I had written myself. I live quietly now, though it feels less like living and more like moving through the shape of a life that's already finished its work. The days are slow, the house is still, and nothing waits for me anymore. The kids visit out of kindness, careful in their questions, polite in their concern, and I can see in their eyes that whatever closeness we never built won't appear at this stage. I don't fault them for it. They learned my distance long before I understood it myself. Most of my time is spent walking through rooms that remember more than I do, touching objects that hold feelings I never fully entered. I think about all the years I treated like rehearsal, convinced I'd step into the real thing when circumstances improved, when I was less tired, when life finally gave me that perfect opening. It never did, and now there's no later left to hide behind. I don't feel anger or regret in any dramatic way, just a steady, quiet awareness that this is the version of life I shaped by waiting. Nights are the clearest. Lying in the dark, I can finally admit that nothing external kept me from living. It was always me postponing, hesitating, assuming there'd be more time. Now there isn't. I'm not looking for sympathy or forgiveness. I just need the truth to exist outside my head at least once. I spent my whole life waiting for the right moment to begin, and I see now that the moment never comes, not because it disappears, but because you do.